Kwekwe, Mino Pajashig, Monique Manatch, Indigenous, Kitikanik Anishinaabe and Dojaba. Welcome. Welcome to InDigital Insights. I'm Monique Manatch. I'm from the Algonquins of Barrier Lake. And today, we're very fortunate to be able to speak with Lynn Gehl. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Lynn is an Algonquin Anishinaabe Kwe. She's an Indigenous cultural critic, an artist, an author, and an advocate. She is a critic of colonial law and policy that harm Indigenous people and the land. Her work encompasses the celebration of Indigenous knowledge. She has a few books out, Anishinaabe Stories, The Truth That Wampum Tells, Claiming Anishinaabe, and Gehl versus Canada. In 2022, she was honored with a Person's Case Governor General's Award. And there's so much in that I want to talk to you about the court case, about your books, about the Governor General's Award. But I'm going to turn it over to you without further ado, Lynn. Kachimigwich.
Miigwech. Kwekwe, Maknakdodan, Pekwakanagon, and Junjaba, Peterborough, Megwan Dida, Gizagate, Manadokwe, Indigenous Cause, and Da, Shaganashi, Noswin, Lynn Gehl, up to go and do Chanandam, Anishinaabe Kwe, Wayan. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me to talk about my art. I'm really thrilled about this. It's going to be a marvelous way to talk about some of the complicated, depthful work that I've done over the last 40 years. And it's going to be particularly special for me because I'm being interviewed by another Algonquin woman. That social mirroring is so important, right? You learn who you are by looking at other people who are like you. So that's really, really makes this more special and meaningful. And also because you're an academic, you're not just an Algonquin, you're also an academic. That doesn't mean that non-academics aren't important. Of course they are. And so I am zooming in from Peterborough, Ontario, but I am a member of Pikwakanagan First Nation, which is the only federally recognized First Nation in Ontario, only Algonquin federally recognized First Nation in Ontario. And it took me a long time to become a member. I went through a long administrative court process with Indian Affairs and the Department of Justice, challenging the issue of unknown and unstated paternity. And then once I was successful at the Ontario Court of Appeal, I was able to become a member of Pikwakanagan because Pikwakanagan relies heavily on status enrollment, which I understand completely. So I'm really happy to be here today and to talk about my art with Monique. I organize my work and I'm a very structured person. At least I try to be structured. So I organize my art in three kind of categories: traditional art, political art, and pencil art. But really the lines between them are blurred. And I thought I'd put that picture of myself up because I've been known to paint my face, which I think is an art form. The way we express our feelings on our face and the way we color our face, it really does convey knowledge, and I see it as an art form. So I'm starting with traditional art. This was a petroform I made. Nick and I moved into a house after living in an apartment for 17 years. We moved into a house and we were doing some of the landscaping in the backyard, and there were so many rocks. I went, well, I'm going to make a petroform versus, a petroglyph. And so, of course, it has, it's cosmologically aligned. So the head is in the east and the tail is in the west. And so I have two pictures here. I consider it an art form. I really like the winter one as well, the way the snow melts quickly. So that's my Mackinac petroform. So this is a turtle I carved. I've carved several of them. I've auctioned them off and gave them away as gifts, just to show I go from big to small, and of course different materials. Right? I was just motivated to do it. This is a burning, so I see it as kind of similar to a pictograph. Burning on birch bark, but this is a piece of cedar. This is called Debwewen Mikan Chichiguing, meaning the truth road art of doing. And this is a traditional teaching. This idea of two circles of knowledge comes from an ancient Anishinaabe scroll where the first circle is the heart knowledge and the other circle is the mind knowledge. And the idea of Anishinaabe truth is that if both heart knowledge and mind knowledge, have to be present and touching and connecting for there to be a truth. It's known as Debwaywen. Debwaywen is our word for truth. And I put the heartberry, the strawberry in the part for the heart because of the heartberry. I think comes from a common teaching that elders will give, that your journey between your mind and your mind and your heart, or your heart and your mind, is a very long journey, and it's a journey to teach people to come to terms with how they're feeling, or come to terms with how they're thinking. So again, it's two circles of knowledge. A lot of people think it's the infinity symbol, but no, it isn't. It's two circles of knowledge coming together, heart knowledge and mind knowledge. And so I decided to burn that in wood on a piece of cedar. That's actually the methodological theory I used in my dissertation, because I had a lot of the embodied heart knowledge about colonial processes, but I didn't have an intellectual understanding. So I was going on a really long journey through my dissertation process. So again, it's an ancient scroll known as Debwaywen Mikem Chichigawing, and it speaks about truth. Where is truth found? So these are some wampum belts that I made during my dissertation process. Again, being an artist and being an embodied knower, I thought I would build these wampum belts. These wampum belts were exchanged at the Treaty at Niagara in 1764. Most people would call these reproductions, but reproductions, but I call them new creations or new additions. And the reason I do that is because the knowledge that's encoded in those belts is real to Anishinaabe people. It's real in our hearts and it's real in our minds. It's not a reproduction feeling. And we don't know where those belts are today. There's some discussion that they might have burnt in a fire. But we do have a picture, we do have a sketching from Paul Kane. So based on that, I decided to make these wampum belts as part of my dissertation process. There's some discussion that the two-war wampum belt wasn't exchanged at the Treaty at Niagara, but that didn't really matter to me because the two-war wampum belt, the philosophy and the theory is inherent in the covenant chain belt. The top belt is it's known as the British and Western Great Lakes Covenant Chain Confederacy Belt. And we know that's a post-contact belt because the year's in it, 1764. But I did something that's unusual or new in my work, in that the two figures in the top that are linking their hands together, I took the heart out of the British, because the British have treated the Algonquins very poorly, and I just thought the British don't have a heart, not when it comes to the Algonquin people. And I've read a lot of the petitions that the Algonquin wrote to the British, and oftentimes they would ask, do you have a heart? Where is your heart? And so I took it out. A lot of people don't like that. That is very controversial, but these are belts that I recreated, and I don't see a problem with that. The other thing I did is in the 24 min belt below, the one in the middle, there was 24, I think it's 24, 28 nations were at the Treaty at Niagara. So, for example, the Nipissing were there, the Algonquin were there, the Cree were there, the Fox were there, the Wendat were there, the Mohawk were there. And with the Algonquin man, I actually took one of the beads and I broke it, I snapped it. And that for me represents the idea that the Algonquins, some of us live with a broken heart because of the way we've been treated by the French and the British. So it's a little bit of I guess you can say, an evolution of the wampum belts, in that I put my own ideas and feelings into it. Now, that can be controversial for some people, but the work I've done, I've come to understand that wampum diplomacy was a fluid process. It wasn't static and put in just a traditional thing from the past. And also the materials were fluid. Sometimes they used beads. Sometimes they used rosary beads. And sometimes they used clay beads. And even the material items of the threadings was fluid. So I really don't have any qualms with doing what I did there. I think probably when I talk about this idea of a broken heart, a lot of people can relate to that. So I've been trying to learn about trees. They say that pipe carriers should know a lot about trees. I'm not a pipe carrier, but that inspired me to learn a little bit about trees, and in particular the walnut tree. So I actually learned quite a bit that they have some medicines in their nuts that the English walnut doesn't have. For example, they can reverse a cavity, for example. I've actually even tapped a walnut tree and was able to get a jar of walnut sap. And when I was cracking open the nuts to get the nuts out, which is a really hard thing to do, they're hard like a rock. I don't know how squirrels do it. I noticed the heart, so I painted some of the hearts inside the nut. So these are a set of, I think they're acrylic on canvas paintings that I did. And these are I'm not sure if you're familiar, Monique, with Petroglyph Provincial Park. It's a really special place for the Anishinaabe. And when I learned that there was some shards, I guess clay pot shards in one of the cracks, and that the decoration style was similar to the decoration style of the ones found in Algonquin Park. Of course, that gave it more meaning for me. So this is it's a really special place, and they have this encircled circle where they've turned it into a man. They I guess anthropomorphized it. But that encircled circle is a very special symbol for Anishinaabe people. It represents the eastern doorway and our symbol for creation. And there was a lot of sex on the rock, but nobody wants to talk about the sex symbols on the rock, but sometimes the reproduction symbols. So you can see on the left-hand side of Gizemanado in the green, you can see that that's the sperm reaching the eastern doorway. It really represents conception, and so I put that in. Now the min there, I added the drums, so you can find those min on the rock if you look really hard and you know where to look. They are there, but the drum I added to it. And then on the right side is we often call that Winona. It's a woman who's on the rock, and it's really interesting the way they incorporated the features of the rock into her body. So there would a crevice, for example, is painted into she is painted around the natural features of the rock. And then again, I have some of the eastern doorway symbols that are on the rock painted there as well. So I call this Gizemanado and Winona, and they're acrylic on canvas. And I try to use very bright colors as well. So a couple years ago, when I was just finishing up Gehl versus Canada and I didn't have any cognitive space, I worked on a farm. I was decommissioning and cleaning it up. And there was all kinds of materials there for me to work with. So there was birch bark and copper wire. So I made some baskets. And the one on my right is I really liked it the way I put in the copper flower. And while I was there, I wove some bulrushes. Yeah, so I actually did some weaving of bulrushes as well. So most of those I gave away or I sold. Again, another wood burning. So of course I find of course, I'm seeking meaning, and 1701, Great Peace of Montreal, a doe dam that represents the Algonquins. But I have since learned that it was completed by a scribe. It wasn't actually an Algonquin who wrote that on there, but it still has a lot of meaning for me in that there is the Algonquin. So in my process of trying to learn the history of the Algonquin people, I was really reaching far, and that was significant to me. It gave me a lot of meaning. So this is an ancient scroll, and it's Anishinaabe. I've learned about this scroll in a lot of places. You know, there's this idea that we're out there picking up the pieces and bringing it home. And as I was learning in the my PhD program, the body of literature that I was reading was a indigenous knowledge. It wasn't history, for example, or it wasn't sociology. It was indigenous knowledge. So all the literature I was reading was about indigenous knowledge, and the teachings as well, the oral teachings. The idea of the program of Indigenous studies is to immerse the student, of course, in Indigenous knowledge. So I encountered a scroll many times. I encountered it once in Basil Johnson's book, but there was no description. And I encountered another scroll in Marie Brant Castellano's, and there was no description. But I'm interested in symbolic literacy, and so of course it caught my eye. And I found it in Dinsmore's, one of his um, ethnologies, I guess, the 7 stages of life. It's called, and then uh, Elder Shirley Williams helped me make this scroll. I had a big piece of birch bark, and so I burnt it on the birch bark, and she helped me. And it's called the 7 stages of life, and you read it from right to left, which is the opposite way than what we're used to reading. And the idea is that there's 7 stages of life, and sometimes we kind of take a detour, but we have to work and get on that trail again. So the first stage is spirit life, and the second stage is fast life, and then there's wandering and wondering life, and truth life, and planting and planning life, and then there's reflection life and elder life. And within that scroll, I decided to put other things in it, like in truth life, I put the encircled circle. In fast life, I put Nana Bojo, and I decided to put Nana Bojo in a dress because there was a lot of discussion that Nana Bojo is not boy or girl. And I put the pipe in there. And so I think it's a really special teaching, and I wish more people knew about this teaching, but it seems to be that our knowledge is such a controversial domain, and it's really governed by power, unfortunately, whether that's in the universities or whether that's through the Medeoin or traditional people. So I really haven't shown this to anyone, but I recently revisited some of my resources that I use to understand it, and I feel more confident to show it. I'm not engaging in cultural appropriation. I'm an Anishinaabe person, and I received this knowledge from many places, as I said, not just one place.
It's beautiful.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
thank you. And I have up in the right the encircled circle, which again is the eastern doorway, or a symbol for creation, and then the thunderbirds who take us home. And it was interesting making it because I really had to think about, we read a different way, right? We Anishinaabe people read a different way. We read east to west versus the other way. So it's quite large. I think it's about 2 feet by maybe 4 feet. So this is again the eastern doorway from a different view, right? And made with copper that I received on the farm. And then I put these beads in to represent like the number of children, for example.
What kind of beads are they?
They're porcelain beads on copper. So this is I call it urban feast. Right, because I don't have the opportunity to eat deer or moose or even pike, for example, or perch. So this is some of the foods that we were eating, and I just started to peel the labels off the cans. And after maybe about several months, maybe a year, I decided to make a collage, and I titled it "Urban Feast." And I was trying to figure out, how would I do this? And then Nick said, just do it, do it in a line, instead of just randomly putting them on there. So I did that. And then I put in a couple of strawberries. If you look closely, you'll see the strawberries. There's one above the agos, for example. So we're going to move into my political art now. Again, this is a piece of birch bark I picked up at the farm, and it was perfectly intact, you know. So the farm was a tree farm, so I really like that. So I made it into a crown, honoring the birch tree, right? The tree's smarter than humans.
And now we're finding so much more about how they communicate with each other.
Yes, yeah, and you can tap a birch tree as well. So this one here, again, it was a piece of wood that I picked up at the farm, and it had this nice flat spot where the knot was. And again, I was trying to do my best to learn about Algonquin history. I've been working on that for quite a few years now. And oftentimes I'll listen to people versus read. In my work too, I will bring in audio things that I've listened to. I will put them in my references, not just text. So this was from Fowler, and he inspired this piece when he said that it's often said that there are two things that the English settlers hated. They hated trees and they hated Native Americans. And he was on the agenda. He was a really good speaker. He's an American professor. So I made this piece. Now, we don't know if that's actually Pontiac, but it's often represented as it is Pontiac.
You figure that is Pontiac? That's a representation of Pontiac?
That's what they say. So I call this Pontiac's tree. So again, this is my political section, my political art. So years ago, when I was just first starting my court case, of course, I had to be brave and start to raise awareness, which I really didn't want to do. But I painted this body sign, which was Gehl versus Canada, and it had a back and a front. I consider that to be art. And then, when Trudeau came in, he talked about, the most important relationship was the relationship between Canada and First Nations people. Well, that turned out to be a big lie. The way they treated children is terrible. Like, that's what Gehl versus the Queen was all about. That's what but it shifted to Gehl versus Canada. It was about the issue of unknown and unstated paternity. And like in 1985, they're at the level of practice, they were assuming that if the father's name wasn't on the birth certificate, they assumed it was a white man, and the child could, of course, then lose entitlement to Indian status. And that's why I took on the court case, because I had an unknown grandfather, and they were assuming he was a white man. And to me, that was outrageous, because you know who it just was outrageous for many reasons, right?
Absolutely. And grandfather at that.
Yeah. So sometimes a woman wouldn't know who the father of the child is for many reasons.
Or she didn't state the father of the child.
Yes, exactly. So that's why I took on Gehl versus Canada. And the other thing that you were talking about, I want to just say that, billions of dollars are coming out of Algonquin territory, just in the Ontario side, for example, and they're only offering us 1.7% of our territory and an $800 million buyout. So, when Trudeau came in on that nonsense statement of the most important relationship was, to me, I knew it was a lie, and it was making me kind of ill when I looked around and saw everybody's faces and they were all so happy and smiling. In my mind, I thought, gee, you don't really know what Canada's all about. Like, that's just rhetoric.
Well, also, they say the most important relationship is with Indigenous people, but they didn't define relationship. It is the most important, but but the relationship itself is a terrible relationship.
Yeah, meaningless rhetoric. So this is like digital art, right? This is how I was feeling when I was the biggest law firm in Canada. The Department of Justice was, I don't know, dragging me through the court system and not addressing the issues. Oh, I have a broken heart down there. I was only 28 when I started. It must have been 57 when I finished.
It impacted your entire life. It changed who you are and who you became.
Oh, it was miserable.
Adversary, though. I mean, it can really make you stronger in some ways, eh?
I think a lot of people don't really understand that I did learn a lot. I mean, it was the biggest law firm in Canada, the Department of Justice, and I didn't have any money.
They wanted to delegate people or relegate people to being Indigenous, but now they're saying they realize that they have a fiduciary responsibility. So the more that they can make us extinct and erase us, um, the better off they see it. So that's when they've started making these policies where the aim is to erase us. I mean, they're well on their way with those policies.
Through the second generation cutoff rule, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is a giant pipe. Again, from materials that I made from the farm, and I painted it. I took no qualms to go first because the pipe came first, right? The pipe came first before the people. The story that I understand is that the spirit of the west wind gave the pipe to Nana Beaujon.
I've seen that pipe. I didn't realize you made it.
Yeah, I made it. I made it and I walked with it the whole way.
Fantastic.
So I'm a sovereignist. I'm an Algonquin sovereignist, and in my imagination, this is what I see would be our flag. So again, I'm in my political area of art, and so I do a lot of models. I call them models, but pictures, diagrams. So I've been speaking a lot about Indigenous women and girls with disabilities, especially after the MMIW report came out, and they didn't talk about the fact that Indigenous women and girls with disabilities have a higher rate of sexual violence. It doesn't mean that our bodies are inferior. It means that Canadian policy is inferior. So some pencil drawings I've did this. So I completed this one when I was in graduate school. It was just a dance I did with a bear. I call it epistemology, a dance with the bear.
We have a creation story about the bear. Yeah, about how a man and a woman were lowered to earth by the spider, and they fell out of their basket and they landed in a tree, and all these animals went by because they were stuck in the tree, and finally it was Makwa who helped them, and Makwa climbed the tree and got them out, and then taught them how to live on the land and how to survive. Showed them what to eat, because anything a bear can eat, we can eat. Showed them about medicines, because the bear is one of the few animals that if it's sick, it will search out plants and remedies. And so it showed us all the medicines. And they say that when you look at a skeleton of a bear, it's very, very similar to that of a human being. In my community, we don't hunt bear. This story comes from my community. We don't hunt bear, and we consider them our brothers and sisters, our relatives. And people of the Bear Clan are medicine. That's the clan where role or responsibility has to do with medicine. So that's really cool. I love that, dancing with the bear. I love that.
So again, these are pencil drawings that I lifted off of the petroglyphs at Peterborough Petroglyph Park. That's why I have the petroglyphs in the background. So the first one, I see it as Gethsemane doe, but it's the encircled circle. To me, I've come to understand it means the eastern doorway with the babies coming through the birth canal, and it's also our symbol for creation. But in this particular glyph, it looks like they anthropomorphized it into a man who just came from a feast. He's got a full belly there. And the next one is a turtle with, I guess, eggs. I guess they're turtle eggs. There's a Nanabojo or Wasakajak, and then a big, what's that, a big duck or something?
A heron, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. So, the 7 stages of life scroll. I see it as another version of that. So I put it inside a braid, and you could see how the person's going on a journey, and they could take these tangents, but they have to get back on that main road of life. And so I just put it in a braid. My mom braided our hair a lot when we were kids. So this here is, I call it getting the pipe. So this is a petroglyph from Pipestone National Monument in Minnesota. It took me a lot to find this actual rubbing. I sent away and said, "Can you send me the rubbing?" Because And then I just drew this out of pencil just to give the knowledge more currency, because what's it doing in a book, And so I see this as getting the first pipe. And I'm currently working on a book, and I think I'm going to propose this as the title, because the book is about Acapulco. And so again, it's a petroglyph at Pipestone National Monument. They don't know what happened, though, to the original glyph, but they have a rubbing of it. I just made a pencil drawing of it. I think a few of my pencil drawings are in my book, Claiming Anishinaabe, and this is one of them. And what I also find really interesting about our wampum belts and our glyphs, and even our petrographs, is the heart is always present. Not always, but you will see the heart, and so this whole idea of heart knowledge was really hard for me to understand for a long time. I kind of thought it was wishy-washy and romantic and not very sophisticated. But when I was doing my dissertation, I had the opportunity to listen to a lot of elders talk about heart knowledge. For example, this idea that when somebody's talking, we look at them so that we can feel what they feel. This idea that the longest journeys between your heart and your mind, and truth is in your heart. So after learning and thinking about all these teachings and glyphs and wampum belts, I started to realize, well, this is really important and this is really significant. And that's when I realized that a truth question a good truth question for Anishinaabe people is Gedebwe na. And that means once you start talking about something after you're done, sometimes a traditional people will say that to you, Gedebwe na, and that's a question that's asking you if that knowledge is rooted in your heart. So when you're doing a PhD, I'm sure you know this, Monique, there's a lot of discussion about what is truth and what is knowledge. And so it really started to ring that this idea that truth is about heart knowledge and mind knowledge coming together. And of course, this glyph is important because I am fascinated with traditional forms of symbolic literacy, but also I wanted to learn more about the pipe and about the tree. And so this is a petroglyph from Petroglyph Provincial Park. And it's an unusual glyph. I think it's unusual. Somebody said to me they thought it was like graffiti-like, which I thought was funny. But
Yeah.
I guess it's possible. But when I was learning about the importance of our faces and the importance of when we talk to one another, we look at one another, because when you express emotion, there's a physiological synchronization, and I could feel that emotion. And I just thought, well, I'm just going to call this face, right? So I really like it. And I was thinking a lot about what I was going through with the court case, Gehl versus Canada, and how I was feeling. That was when I painted my face, actually, black, because I was just so tired of it. So I call this face.
Do they use like onion paper with or I don't know what kind of paper they would have used for the rubbings?
I don't know. You can still go to Peterborough Provincial Park and they'll encourage you to do a rubbing, but it's not on an actual glyph on the rock. They reproduce the glyph on a board, and they'll give you a crayon to scribble over it.
Yeah, I remember it was 20 years ago, or no, almost 20, no, 96. We went to Petroglyph. I was running the Aboriginal media program in Tyendinaga, and we took a group they were all Indigenous students to petroglyphs. And that interpreter was there, and he said that if you're Indigenous, they allow you to go on the rock. But so we were allowed to go on. And I felt so gingerly, so I wasn't sure if I did, but I was afraid. I didn't want to, but we went on, we smudged, we said a prayer. We, were able to get really close and look at each of the different ones. It was very, impactful.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about that rock, that it's soft rock, and then they use a harder rock to do the
Yeah.
carving. And then I think anthropologists darkened them so people could see them better, darkened the glyphs, and um, again, was really important for me, or significant for me, when I learned that see, they can't really age that rock, right? Because it's a trace. It's, yeah. So the potsherds are just a little bit of evidence. I think they say it was like, well, I don't know, 1,000 years
Easily. Yeah.
before Columbus, or Champlain,
Yeah.
before Champlain.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find I call it traditional symbolic literacy forms. And that was a real moment for me when I realized we had a writing system. It was just different. It was a big moment in my shift in my consciousness. And ever since then, I've been thinking about them. And it was Marie Baptiste's work that made me realize, that helped me realize. She's Mi'kmaq, I think, from the East Coast. And now I realize that, there's birch bark scrolls and wampum belts and painted hides and petroglyphs, and even scrolls in the landscape, like Akapuktuk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, I really value smoke signals, reading petroforms, reading the star constellations.
And sign language. We had a sign language right across, trade language using sign to. It was. I was briefly in a class with Floyd Favell. He's an Indigenous director and um, theater uh, dramaturge, and he had these old videos of Indigenous people using sign language, and he had one with an Indigenous chief speaking with Buffalo Bill, and the look on the chief's face, because Buffalo Bill was doing all this stuff, and and it, obviously, like, you could see it on the face of the chief. This guy, Buffalo Bill, didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't speaking it properly. He wasn't waiting for a response. He was just, showing off, kind of thing. And when Floyd was telling us afterwards about sort of the background of that film, that video that he showed us about, and then he showed us other people doing the actual sign language and the difference. So it was pretty, and then that was right across, so we could all speak to each other.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, that more people should understand that, settler people, because there's that common discussion that we were pre-literate people. We weren't sophisticated intellectually. Well, we actually were.
Far more sophisticated, and also, writing actually began with accounting, and it began spontaneously in three different areas of the world. But it happened because you owe me 2 chickens and a goat. So you can imagine, like, already that attitude, as opposed to the imagery and the storytelling and the oral tradition of passing on knowledge, as opposed to having it condensed into you owe me 2 chickens and a goat. That's why I love that idea of unpacking that image. Sunny just went on and unpacked, and then said, well, this means, and then unpacked, and then and it was just like, it was enormous. The knowledge was absolutely, and I just remember feeling it was vast. And then it all got folded back in, and he went in reverse to the point where it was that one image.
Yeah, I know sometimes as a writer, you can write a very short, profound sentence, and there's so much in there, and they want you to unpack it. It's like, well, it's all there. Right?
Yeah. Sometimes it loses meaning when you unpack a sentence.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not like an image, though. An image can. And I think, that definitely speaks to how we literally saw the world and how we interacted and engaged with our surroundings and with people, with our communities.
Yeah, and if you didn't get it, then you went on a journey.
As opposed to whether or not you have the skill to read and write, that's hierarchical, whereas it was a journey. Yeah, it was a learning journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if, like, when I first saw the scroll in Basil Johnson's book, and then I saw it in Marlene Castellano's book, and I just encountered it and encountered it, and then eventually I just kept thinking about that, and then eventually an elder taught it to me, Shirley Williams, and then I found it in Densmore's book. It was a journey, a long journey of going, oh, okay, I get it, I get it. But I think the issue with Indigenous people now, we really need our own structures to move us forward. And so I think the scroll of Deboy when me come chigawing, that idea of two circles, is a powerful teaching that people can use. And I also think the 7 stages of life, because people do veer off, right? And yeah, got to get back on. I wish there was more space for those teachings. I guess that's what I wish for. More people would talk about them.
I think if we look at how we develop curriculum in school systems, not just on reserve, but in mainstream school systems, and these types of things are taught. I mean, they have the Catholic school system where it's just one denomination of Christianity that is the basis of their. But for me, I think it's important that kids are taught many systems, because there's so many different ways of looking at the world, and I think it would give them a more adaptable and critical mindset.
Yeah, this idea that humans have dominion over the earth is really problematic.
Yeah, I say that in most talks that I give, that we were created last and we were not given dominion. And I use that word specifically, that we were created last, and it was only with the help of the rest of creation that we were created. That's another one of our creation stories where it talks about the different gifts we got from the different creatures. All creatures, even lice, gave us the gift of persistence. But is your PhD available online? Do you have a copy of that? I'd love to read it.
Oh, yeah, but the Truth of Wampum Tales, I converted it to a book.
I wondered if one of your books was from your PhD.
It was really hard to get it published because of the methodology. Because I used this idea of Deboy when me kan chichigawing, this idea of mind knowledge and heart knowledge. I said I had the heart knowledge, the embodied knowledge, all the misery. I didn't have an intellectual understanding. I didn't understand Canada's history. I didn't understand the land claim. What's the difference between a land claim and a treaty, for example?
That was interesting. I saw that you sent me. That was really cool.
Yeah. Once in a while I've encountered actually a man who said, I think you're confused because you keep saying you want a treaty, but you're complaining about the land claim. You must be confused. I said, no, I'm not confused. The land claim is about extinguishment. The treaty is about sharing. We want a treaty. We don't want a land claim. And I said, the problem is Canada has confused you as a settler person by calling it a modern treaty process. And he got it. He got it right away when I did that, and that was good. But it was kind of difficult because he was saying, "Oh, young lady, you must be very confused."
Wow.
Well, it's sexism, right? Yeah. But he valued it when I said, "No, I'm not confused." But it was a hard lesson for me because I was completely ignorant about whether I wasn't a community person living in Pikwakanagan or Barrier Lake or Wolf Lake, for example. I was in urban Toronto.
No, I grew up in Toronto too. Actually, I grew up in Rexdale.
Me too.
Really? Whereabouts?
Oh, well, that's so bizarre. I don't even want to say it. Islington in the 401?
Oh my God, I was Kipling and Albion.
Yeah, so I'm coming to the place where I talk about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When you're living in those kinds of areas of a project with, a mother with 8 kids in 10 years, your needs are different, right? Your needs are different, and you're not really I don't think you're developing At least I didn't cognitively. I was more trying to understand and survive and understand what happened to the Algonquin people. Why were we living in this slum hole when Parliament Hill was on our land, and nobody would talk about it? You know, we would take our trips into our territory and to Golden Lake, but there was no explicit discussion of it. It was almost like it was, well, it was illegal. We were illegal. What we legal to be who we were, illegal to be fishing in the lake. And so seeking meaning was a real big journey for me. And like I started in psychology trying to understand, the human condition, and I shifted to anthropology, which hugely changed my thinking. It was phenomenal. So much so that I went deeper into understanding Indigenous knowledge more explicitly because I was seeking meaning, seeking understanding. And as I said, the works of people like Marie Batiste was really influenced my thinking. And, I was always more of an artist than I was an academic, an intellectual. I learned how to read, and beyond primary school level when I was 30. So I really wasn't this natural academic. So it was a slow process of learning, and learning how to think conceptually was a struggle. But I'm happy I got the PhD, but I'm happy I'm writing. I mean, it gave me meaning, right? It gives me meaning to serve. But I don't think that I think there's a lot of Algonquins right now who don't really care because they're going through so much of their own stuff, such as the land claim.
My entire life to this point, even now, I'm still on that journey of reconnecting to the culture and to my community and to the Algonquin Nation.
And we need to move it into the contemporary, right? We can't just keep it in the past.
No, it has to be.
Yeah, that whole trilateral agreement thing was such a disappointment.
Well, it was devastating. It split the community. People literally created a village, actually on my grandfather's trapping grounds. They called it Maiganejik, means Wolf's Passage. And because of the violence, they were burning down houses. And people had to leave to be safe. And then, there's this whole issue around whether or not they could still receive welfare because they didn't have an address, whether or not their kids could go to school or were going to be taken because they weren't going to school, let alone the school that they created for themselves in the village, let alone, that they were building this place that, it just wasn't recognized, right? I went into the public school during this time. It was in the early 90s. And in one of the classrooms, there was a list on the blackboard, which families were cronies and which families were dissidents. And what grade was being taught in that classroom? And what are they being like? They're cousins on either side, brothers and sisters on either side.
I've been in that situation. Well, the land claim is really controversial because it operates on an extinguishment model, and there's a lot. It's an industry. There's a lot of money coming through that land claim process, and so there's some people who want the land claim and some people who don't want the land claim. They'd rather have a treaty. Well, we have all kinds of issues with Pretendian Algonquins as well. So yeah, I've been in that situation where it's dividing families, and what Canada's doing to, for example, Barrier Lake, it's appalling. It's appalling. It's a genocide, and I don't really see anybody understanding that, really. But we're all up in arms about the genocide overseas.
Yeah, and people they blame the victim. Rapid Lake, they just can't get their shit together. Like, what? Excuse me? When they impose the electoral system, the first time basically that's been done since Six Nations, they imposed the electoral system. Mind you, like, there were issues around what was happening with the traditional system. There were people in power who would have remained in power, who insisted that that was their role. but they were saying they were chosen by elders, but the elders were afraid. It was not a great situation, and that is a direct result of residential school, because these people, like, who was it? It was Wilton Littlechild, who said, going to residential school, first they turned us into animals, and then they turned us loose. So you had these people who had been tortured as children, and these traumatic relationships and abusive relationships established at residential school. When they came home, those relationships continued. It's not like it stopped.
And it's really sad because the trilateral agreement was such a hopeful model.
Co-management, harmonization. They took all the information given by the elders around hunting and fishing, around where medicines are. Like, they took all the cultural knowledge and then used it against the people.
Yes, and I guess that's why they had to eliminate that trilateral agreement, because it was an alternative model that they didn't want other nations to think was available for them. And nothing has changed. Nothing has changed.
No. Well, it's one step forward and two steps back.
Yes, a lot of rhetoric.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think about digitization in consideration of archival materials, but also of shared moments with family? So in some ways, people say, you're not supposed to record the elders. You're removing their responsibility, or you're making a distance. You're creating a distance between the youth and the elders, because the role of the elders is to teach the youth. And if you record them, then they don't have to sit and talk and listen to the elders. The youth don't. There are parts of our culture that shouldn't ever be recorded. Maybe it's sacred, maybe, for whatever reason. And so I'm wondering about that. How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, it's difficult because, if we don't allow the culture to evolve, then we could be left behind. So I think if the elder allows it, if the traditional person allows it, I think we could go with that. And I think what I think is really important is we have to make sure they are an elder accepted in their community, right? So I think it's okay. I like the idea of face recording versus just audio.
Yeah, so much of our storytelling has to do with, body language. I mean, and what I wouldn't give to hear or to see a recording of my grandmother. She passed when I was 14. And if I could, hear her stories again, if I could listen to her again and see that movement, the way she tilts her head, the way she emphasizes something, the way she tackles a topic, what she feels is important. I think it is. But I think we have to be sensitive to that. We held a conference in 2019 where it was about digital artists and artistry. And the upshot was that some things should never be put on the internet. Not to say they shouldn't be recorded, but shouldn't be put on the internet. And that we had to be very careful about how we protected intellectual property. One of the things that when digital imagery is uploaded to the internet, it's there for other people to appropriate.
I've had that experience.
Really?
Yeah, it's difficult balance though, because we want to reach the people who need the knowledge in terms of community people, and then what happens is we all become afraid that a settler person is going to steal our indigenous our intellectual property, and it's unfortunate because for example, the teaching about mind knowledge and heart knowledge coming together, that's a really useful teaching for our young community people. And the same with the 7 stages of life.
Are there specific protocols that you adhere to or that come from Algonquin knowledge transference?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of talk about Algonquin knowledge transfer, but doing a PhD in Indigenous studies, I was exposed to a lot of, I guess you can say, axiological teachings or moral teachings from broader Indigenous nations. And one thing that moves me forward is I have to write for people. I have to write for people. I think that's a really important, I'm going to, as you use it, Indigenous protocol, that we write for community people. We're not writing for the academy or for the journal. So I've really tried to write in using accessible words and terms, short sentences, short paragraphs, adding diagrams and pictures, things like that. So in that way, I think I'm following Indigenous protocols. The one thing that I hear a lot people talk about is that all our knowledge comes from elders, and certainly elders have knowledge and they provide us with wisdom, but they're not the only source of knowledge. The knowledge is in the land, for example. So for example, when I write about Akapuktuk, I always, of course, credit and honor William Commanda because he preserved that, which I think is amazing. I do on my CV, I do talk about all the teachers I've had over time, but Monique, some of the most intimate connections, I made them on my own through deep, deep introspections. So Debwewe Mikan Chichigawing, for example, I had a collection of teachings from people, and then suddenly I saw the scroll, and somebody gave me the teaching of the scroll, and I was able to put it all together like a puzzle. And I did write about that. It's in Alternative, and I credit every elder and traditional person who talked to me about heart knowledge and the importance of it. So I think protocols are important. I think we can't be paranoid, though, that think somebody's going to steal our intellectual property.
That's what Albert says too, Albert Dumont, that he said that people ask him who his teachers are. And he said that my teachers are on the land. My teachers are the trees and the forest and holding ceremony on the land. He said that's where I've learned a lot of my teachings. And I think that makes so much sense. They say that we have the knowledge inside of us, but it's up to us to find that knowledge and bring it out to, I guess, from the heart to the mind, really.
A lot of people essentialize Indigenous knowledge as just being in the elders when it's in many places, right? And like Albert says, even in the babies.
Well, I want to thank you so much for talking with me today and spending time with us. And I've learned a lot. I've learned so much from you. And I want to continue. I'm hoping we can continue to work together and maybe find a project to work together um, and see where that can lead. Because I think you're so knowledgeable. There's so much knowledge there. And I know that, when you do these finished products, it's only a tip of the iceberg, really, of what went into it. And so I'd like to explore that a lot more. So Kachimigwich. Thanks, Lynn.
Miigwech, for asking me. I really appreciate it.